I think that the only thing harder than getting a child with a disability to write something is getting them to then evaluate and revise it. And the thing that they always say is, but I finished. I finished. And they don't want to ever have to do any revision to their work. So let's talk about that and how we can help them find better ways to communicate and make themselves understood. We have here some objectives. Once again, we're going to talk about why kids resist evaluating and revising their writing. It's probably the easiest thing. We'll talk about how to provide adult feedback, how to teach kids to engage in peer revision, how to connect reading and writing together to make both processes seem more authentic, and how to create opportunities for students to successfully evaluate their own writing. And these are some of the thoughts that I had about why kids hate to revise their writing. And I think the number one thing is it's just hard. It's just hard. And maybe you feel that same way about your writing. It's just really hard to revise it. It's done, right? One and done. You asked me to write a paragraph. I wrote a paragraph. Now leave me alone. I think that a lot of times kids have limited knowledge of what writing could be or why they're doing it. A lot of the things that we ask students to do are irrelevant, that those writing assignments are disconnected from the student. So much of what we ask students to do is just to write something without a clear audience in mind or a clear purpose. And when we don't have a purpose, then we don't find the relevance. And then it's just writing a paragraph for the sake of writing a paragraph, which is really boring. And I think this revise what leads back again to limited knowledge of what writing could be. What do I need to revise? Why is that not clear? I don't really get it. And that limited knowledge, irrelevance, revise what, I think it all ties together. One of the things that really supports revision, evaluating, improving our own writing is when there is an authentic, real world relevance to what we're doing. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Communication. I think kids lose track of the fact that the whole reason for writing is that we're trying to communicate something. And that's also why we need to revise and evaluate, because our message maybe isn't clear. And if you have an authentic reason to communicate, then you become more interested in a clear message. And, some of the really relevant activities that students sometimes take on are those persuasive or argumentative pieces of writing where they're trying to convince the school principal that they should have to wear school uniforms, or they should be allowed to keep their phones on, or the campus should be open for high school and the children should be allowed to go out to lunch if they want to. When there is that level of authenticity to the assignment that we give kids, then they are much more motivated to try to figure out how to have a more clear message. Not everything we do can be in that way. We can't always have a really cool argumentative piece trying to persuade somebody to do something we want, but we can have goal-driven writing. So if kids know why they're writing, what's the objective of this piece, that will help them understand about their communication. And having a really clear audience. I think that's also really supportive of kids who are writing, that it's not just writing for a teacher to get a grade, but you're trying to get a point across. And that's where this idea of goal-driven revision comes up. And I've mentioned I've written a book myself, and it was really a bit difficult because, writing a book difficult, takes a lot of time. But I had a goal because I had some things that I really wanted to communicate, and I wanted to communicate that clearly. So that was very authentic. And the revisions that I needed to do, and I had an editor who was working with me, and she would come back to me and she would tell me that I needed to work on this or this wasn't clear. And I really welcomed my editor's feedback, because at the core of everything that I was doing in writing that book was I was trying to communicate more clearly with the people who were going to be my readers. And I wanted to get my point out there. And because I had that goal, I didn't resist revising my work. I welcomed revising my work. And I think that authenticity and goal-driven mission of writing is something that can really help kids. And I think it's something that we lose when we teach writing. So if we can get the idea of communication out to our students, that could really just give us a head start on all the other things about how to revise. Your textbook talked about a few things that can be supportive, and I just pulled a few main ideas out of that book. That teacher feedback is really useful, but I think I'm going to start with this idea down here about being supportive with your feedback, that we're not just looking for mistakes. And that is not an experience that a lot of our kids have had. They have had the experience where someone looks at their work and tells them all the things they did wrong. This is wrong, you didn't put this capital, you forgot that period, you spelled that incorrectly, blah, blah, blah. And when that is the message that you receive back from your teacher, you're not feeling very motivated to do better later. So instead of only looking for the mistakes, look for the things the students did correctly and effectively and point to those. And that's kind of going here, skills. Point to the skills they've demonstrated. Because when we can show them, hey, this thing that you did right here, that really worked for me as a reader. It helped me understand your message. And this is why that was helpful. Because sometimes when kids are doing things right, they don't know why it's right any more than they don't know why it's wrong. So when we're being supportive in our feedback, we point to things and we say, yes, this is how it is. This is why this is good. So let's look at here. Does this part comply with what we just talked about was so effective over here? And I think that when you're looking at those skills in that way, from a very supportive framework of you brought some real strengths to this piece of writing, also there are some ways in which this is not working, so let's try to fix that up so this communicates better. We can use strategies. We've talked all semester long about strategies, which is basically task analysis. What are the steps that we go through when we're doing a revision? One of the things I like to do when I'm writing is I like to finish writing something, and then put it aside for a couple of days, and not look at it, and then come back to it fresh, so that when I read it again, that it's clearer to me. Sometimes I want to read it out loud. There's lots of ways that we can teach kids to use strategies so that they can kind of go through the steps first, next, then. And verbal feedback is really effective. Written feedback works, but if a kid's not a great writer, that's not going to be a great kind of feedback. So if you can have writers' conferences where the kid comes and individually sits with you, and you say, like I said, the supportive, skills-based kind of discussion, and you have that discussion with a piece of the student's writing right in front of you so that you can talk about it together, I think that's an effective way to give feedback from the teacher. But teachers aren't always there to evaluate the writing, and nor should they be. At some point you might want to write something just to write. And so we have to give kids the tools to evaluate their own work. Using a rubric that's specific to the assignment is really helpful. Not just looking at spelling, punctuation, etc., but if you're writing a persuasive essay, what are the specific things about an effective persuasive essay that need to be in there? So if you have a rubric or a checklist by genre, the kids can use that to help themselves out. We can use explicit instruction. We can model and practice revision. And we could use real student text. So I posted a video on Canvas called My Favorite Mistake. It's actually a math video, but I really love the idea of it, that the teacher collects up student work, very quickly evaluates it, and then does a whole class lesson about a mistake that she's seeing across the class. And it doesn't really single anybody out, but it's timely, it's relevant, and it's attached to the student work. So use real student text and model and practice revision. So what does it look like if I'm revising this? If I take this and I'm reading it and it doesn't make sense to me, what are the steps that I'm going through as a reader and a writer? How do we do that revision? And another effective thing is to use a mentor text to connect reading and writing. We keep coming back to this idea, connect reading and writing. If you want kids, again, I'm going to talk about persuasive essays. If you want your students to write something that's persuasive, have them read some really well-written persuasive essays so that they can then compare their own writing to a text in the genre. to see how it matches up. And that's what that idea of mentor text is. We're reading and writing. We're reading with a writer's eye and writing with a reader's eye. Ooh, that was a fun one. So when you write, you're thinking about your reader, and when you read, you're thinking about how you can be a better writer. Peer revising is awesome. Also requires a bunch of prerequisite skills. So you're not just going to have two kids sit down together and revise. They need to have had some experience with receiving constructive feedback, which is something that maybe you can practice when you're the teacher and you have your conference with kids. We need to teach kids how to provide constructive feedback. So maybe we give them some sentence stems and prompts about how kids can say to another kid, oh, I really liked how you did this, but this part confused me. You know, giving that kind of real specific constructive feedback. Students also need the social skills of listening and turn taking. And I'm sure there are a bunch more. And then once they kind of have that, and I say have that, they don't have it, you teach them those skills before you put them into groups to do peer revision. Then we can teach students within the genre of writing. We can provide scripts to help with the evaluation within the genre. So that kind of goes back to that last slide about self-evaluation and about the use of rubrics and about the use of mentor texts. So if we're reading and writing within fairy tales, then we can read and write using scripts of like, is this a fairy tale? Does it have all the parts of a fairy tale? We can teach students to be critical and savvy readers. And when I say critical, I mean critical friend, not just like you're trying to attack that text, but that you are trying to read that text so that you can help it be better. And how to be specific. You can't just tell somebody this is good or this is bad. You need to say this is good because. This is hard for me to understand because. And there is a great video also on Canvas about students revising the photograph or an illustration of a butterfly. And I love that example because when the teacher is working with the students to make the butterfly look more realistic, they're doing all of this. They're doing constructive feedback. They're doing listening and turn taking. They have some prompts about what they need and what's going to make it better and what's going to make it look more like a butterfly. And they were able to do that revision without having to get too bogged down in reading and writing. And it was a nice way to practice. It reduced the cognitive load. So make sure you watch that video. It's really charming. That is all I have. That seems like I should have a lot more to say about revision and evaluation, but it's definitely something you want to be practicing. And I will talk to you on another video.